Security guard fainted at the sight of the necklace. The beggar was wearing, the same one his daughter wore when she disappeared 9 years ago. In the bustling streets of Cuautla, Morelos, Esteban Ruiz walked with a heavy step and a blank stare. At 45 years old, the security guard uniform he wore seemed to hang over his emaciated body, a silent witness to years of neglect and alcohol abuse. His face, furrowed with premature wrinkles, reflected the weight of a decade of remorse and fruitless searching. Almost 10 years ago, on a night Esteban remembered with painful clarity, his wife Marisol and daughter Lucia, barely 8 years old, had disappeared without a trace. That night, Esteban had come home drunk and furious like so many other times. Screams and the sound of breaking glass had filled the small apartment. When he awoke the next morning, with his head throbbing and the bitter taste of regret in his mouth, he found himself alone. Marisol and Lucia had vanished, taking only the essentials with them. Since then, Esteban had lived in a limbo of guilt and despair. He alternated between periods of frantic searching and falls into the abyss of alcohol. His job as a security guard at a local mall was the only thing keeping him afloat, albeit barely. That afternoon, as he made his usual rounds of the streets surrounding the mall, something caught his eye. A man, visibly destitute, was rummaging through a dumpster. It was not an unusual scene in Cuautla, but something about the man's neck made Esteban stop in his tracks. Hanging above the dirty t-shirt, a small gold medallion glittered. Esteban's heart began to pound. He knew that locket. He had bought it himself for Lucia on her 8th birthday, just a few weeks before the fateful night of her disappearance. It was a unique piece, specially made for her, with her name engraved in delicate cursive letters. Without a second thought, Esteban approached the man. "Excuse me," he said in a trembling voice. "That locket, where did you get it?" The man, startled by the sudden interaction, instinctively recoiled. His eyes, sunken in a face weathered by life on the streets, showed a mixture of distrust and fear. "What, this?" he asked, clutching the medallion protectively. "I found it, it's mine now." Esteban felt the world fade away around him. 10 years of searching, of sleepless nights, imagining worst-case scenarios. And now, suddenly, he had a tangible clue. "Please," he pleaded, struggling to maintain his composure. "That locket belonged to my daughter. It disappeared years ago. I need to know where she found it." The man, who introduced himself as Thomas, looked at Esteban with a mixture of compassion and suspicion. After a moment's hesitation, he sighed deeply. "Look, sir, I don't know anything about your daughter. I found this necklace a few days ago at the entrance to the old tunnels near the Cuautla River. You know, those that they say were part of an ancient drainage system." Esteban knew about the tunnels. They were part of local history, a subway labyrinth that stretched under parts of the city, abandoned decades ago and the subject of numerous urban legends. It would never have occurred to him to look there. "Can you take me?" asked Esteban, his voice a mixture of desperation and renewed hope. Tomas hesitated for a moment, but something in Esteban's pleading gaze moved him. "All right," he finally agreed, "but don't expect to find much. Those tunnels are dangerous and full of vagrants and drug addicts." As he followed Tomas through the streets of Cuautla toward the ancient tunnels, Esteban felt like his heart was going to burst. For the first time in a decade, he had a real clue as to Lucia's whereabouts. However, a voice inside him reminded him to keep his expectations in check. He had followed false leads before, each one leaving him more shattered than the last. Reaching the entrance to the tunnels, hidden behind dense vegetation and years of neglect, Esteban stopped. The smell of dampness and abandonment was overwhelming. The darkness that stretched beyond the entrance seemed to taunt him, as if it held secrets he wasn't ready to discover. "Are you sure you want to do this?" asked Thomas, noticing Esteban's hesitation. Esteban closed his eyes for a moment, remembering Lucia's smiling face, Marisol's laughter, the life they had had before her addiction ruined everything. She opened her eyes with renewed determination. "I have to do it," she replied. "I've waited too long." With those words, Stephen took the first step into the darkness, unaware that that simple act would mark the beginning of a journey that would change his life forever. The tunnels held secrets deeper than he could imagine, and in their depths he would find not only answers but also the opportunity for redemption he had longed for so long. Darkness engulfed Stephen and Thomas as they moved deeper into the tunnels. The air grew thicker with each step, laden with humidity and the distant echo of drips. Esteban turned on his phone's flashlight, revealing weathered concrete walls and rubble-covered floors. "Where exactly did you find the medallion?" asked Esteban, his voice echoing in the narrow passage. Thomas pointed ahead, a little further on, at a fork. "But listen, these tunnels are treacherous. People say there's some kind of subway city down here, but no one I know has ever made it this far." As they advanced, Stephen noticed markings on the walls, strange symbols, arrows and numbers that seemed to form some kind of code. His heart was pounding, torn between hope and fear. Suddenly a noise startled them. Hurried footsteps and muffled voices were approaching. Before they could react, they found themselves surrounded by a group of young men, no older than 20, armed with sticks and distrustful looks. "Who are you?" demanded to know a short-haired, fierce-looking girl who appeared to be the leader. "What are you doing here?" Esteban, with his hands in the air, tried to remain calm. "My name is Esteban. I'm looking for my daughter and my ex-wife. They disappeared 10 years ago and—" "Bullshit," interrupted another young man. "I'm sure they're from the construction company. They're coming to kick us out." Confusion gripped Esteban. "Construction company? No, they don't understand. I just want to find my family. My daughter's name is Lucia. She would be 18 now. My ex-wife is Marisol. Please, if you know anything." The mention of those names provoked an immediate reaction. The young men exchanged glances and whispers. The leader, after a moment's deliberation, spoke. "Come with us, but if you try anything, you will regret it." Guided by the group, Stephen and Thomas moved deeper into the tunnels. After what seemed like an eternity of twists and turns and passages, they came to an open space that took Stephen's breath away. Before them stretched a veritable subway city. Tents and makeshift structures filled the cavern. Generator-powered lights illuminated the place, revealing hydroponic gardens, common areas, and what appeared to be a makeshift school. Dozens of people, of all ages, milled about the site, some looking curiously at the new arrivals. "Welcome to Nueva Esperanza," the leader said, her tone now less hostile. "I am Jimena, follow me." As they walked through the subway community, Esteban couldn't believe his eyes. Entire families lived here, children played in designated areas, and adults worked at various tasks. It was a fully functional world hidden beneath the streets of Cuautla. Jimena led them to a larger structure, which appeared to function as a community center. As they entered, Esteban froze. There, standing in front of him, was a woman who, despite the years that had passed, he recognized instantly. "Marisol?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. The woman turned, her eyes widening in recognition. "Esteban," she said, her voice a mixture of surprise and fear. Time seemed to stand still. 10 years of separation, pain and regret condensed in that moment. Esteban took a step forward, but stopped when he saw Marisol's expression, a mixture of fear and determination. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice steady but with a barely perceptible tremor. Before Esteban could answer, another voice froze him in his tracks. "Dad?" He turned slowly to see a young woman of 18, with the same eyes he remembered from his little Lucia. But she was no longer the little girl he had left behind. She was a young, strong woman, with a look that mixed disbelief and a hardness that broke his heart. "Lucia?" Esteban managed to say, tears streaming down his face. "My child." But Lucia didn't move to hug him. Instead, she moved closer to Marisol, placing herself protectively in front of her. "What do you want?" asked Lucia, her tone cold and distant. "How did you find us?" Esteban, overcome with emotions, tried to explain about the medallion, his search, the years of regret. But every word seemed inadequate in the face of the reality of what he saw. Marisol, after a moment of tense silence, spoke. "Esteban, I don't know how you found us, but you must understand. This place, Nueva Esperanza, is a refuge for families fleeing situations like the one we are in. You can't just show up and expect everything to be okay." Reality hit Esteban hard. Not only had he found his family, but he was discovering that they had been instrumental in the creation of this subway community, a haven for those who, like them, had fled abusive situations. I'm sorry, Esteban began, his voice breaking. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I have changed. I've spent every day of the last 10 years regretting it, searching for them, trying to be better. Lucia, with tears in her eyes but holding her ground, replied, "And you think that's enough? Do you know how many nights I cried, how much fear we had?" Esteban lowered his head, the weight of his past actions crushing him. "No, I don't. And I would give anything to be able to change the past. But I'm here now and I want to make things right. Please give me a chance." Marisol and Lucia exchanged glances, a silent conversation passing between them. Finally, Marisol spoke. "Esteban, this place is more than a refuge for us. It's our home, our mission. We can't just leave it." "I'm not asking you to," Esteban quickly replied. I just want to be a part of their lives in some way. Help if I can. Show them that I've changed." Jimena, who had been watching silently, interjected, "Maybe there is a way. Esteban, do you know why we are so defensive? Our community is in danger. There are plans for a big construction right on top of us. If they proceed, this will all be destroyed." Esteban looked around, seeing for the first time not only his lost family, but an entire community struggling to survive. An idea began to form in his mind. Maybe I can help," he said slowly. "My job as a security guard. I have access to information, contacts in the city. I could—" "No," Lucia interrupted sharply. "We can't trust him. How do we know he won't betray us?" Silence fell over the room. Esteban felt the weight of a decade of mistakes on his shoulders. But in that moment, looking into the eyes of his daughter, the woman he once loved, and the community they had built, he knew he would do whatever it took to prove himself. "I will show them that I have changed," Esteban said with determination. "I'm not asking you to trust me right away, but give me a chance to help, to do the right thing for once." Marisol, after a long moment of consideration, nodded slowly. "It's all right, Esteban, you can stay and help, but you'll be watched, and at the first sign that you haven't really changed, you'll leave. Understood?" Esteban nodded, grateful for this small opportunity. "Thank you. I won't fail you, I promise." Thus began the real challenge for Esteban. Not only would he have to face his own demons and addictions, but also earn the trust of an entire community, and, most importantly, his own family. The next few days were a whirlwind for Esteban. He was assigned a small space in the community, far from where Marisol and Lucia lived. Every morning he woke up with the determination to prove himself, but also with the crushing weight of his past. The first challenge came sooner than he expected. On his third night in Nueva Esperanza, stress and anxiety pushed him to the brink. His hands were shaking and his body was screaming for a drop of alcohol. He found himself wandering the tunnels, desperate to escape and find a drink. That's when he ran into Don Emiliano, an old man who seemed to be a counselor of sorts in the community. "Addiction is a hard beast to tame, isn't it, boy?" the old man said, his voice soft but penetrating. Esteban, surprised and embarrassed, could barely nod. "Come with me," Don Emiliano offered. "I have something that might be able to help you." He led him to a small hydroponic garden where various herbs were growing. Don Emiliano prepared an infusion with some of them and offered it to Esteban. "This won't cure your addiction," he explained, "but it may help you calm the anxiety. The real battle is in your mind and in your heart." As he drank the infusion, Esteban listened to Don Emiliano's story. He too had been an alcoholic, had lost his family, and almost lost his life. It was Nueva Esperanza that saved him. "But remember," Don Emiliano warned, "this place is not magic. The real strength must come from you." That night marked a turning point for Esteban. He began attending support meetings within the community, facing his demons day by day. Each time temptation assaulted him, he remembered the look of disappointment in Lucia's eyes, the distrust in Marisol's, and found the strength to resist. Meanwhile, Esteban immersed himself in the work of the community. He helped in the gardens, repaired electrical systems, and little by little began to earn the respect of some residents. However, his relationship with his family remained strained. Lucia actively avoided him, and the few times they crossed paths, The tension was palpable. Marisol, for her part, kept a polite distance, watching his every move with caution. One afternoon, while Esteban was working on repairing a water pump, Lucia approached unexpectedly. "Why are you still here?" she asked, her tone a mixture of curiosity and defiance. Esteban, surprised by the sudden interaction, answered honestly, "Because I want to be a part of your lives, because I want to prove that I can be better, and because this place, what you have built here, deserves to be protected." Lucia stared at him for a moment, as if searching for the truth in his words. "You know it won't be easy, right? You can't just show up after 10 years and expect everything to be fine." "I know," Esteban replied with a sigh, "and I don't expect to be forgiven overnight. I just want the chance to try." Something in the sincerity of his words seemed to touch Lucia. For a brief moment, her expression softened. "We'll see," she finally said before walking away. That small exchange, though tense, gave Esteban a spark of hope. It was a start, however small. As Esteban wrestled with his inner demons and tried to rebuild bridges with his family, the external threat to Nueva Esperanza grew. Jimena and other community leaders met frequently, discussing strategies to protect their home. At one of these meetings, to which Esteban was reluctantly invited, the gravity of the situation was revealed. The construction company, Desarrollo Urbano del Futuro S.A., had accelerated their plans. They had strong political connections and were pushing to begin work in a matter of months. "We need information from the inside," Jimena said, looking directly at Esteban. "You said you had contacts in the city. It's time you used them." Esteban nodded, aware that this was the time to prove himself. "I'll do everything I can," he promised. "But you must understand that this could be dangerous. If they find out I'm leaking information—" "Now you're worried about danger," interrupted Lucia, who was present at the meeting. "After everything you put us through?" The comment hit Esteban like a punch in the stomach, but he stood his ground. "I'm worried about the danger to all of you. If I'm found out, they could track me here." Marisol, who had remained silent, spoke up. "He's right. We need to be careful. We can't put the whole community at risk." The tension in the room was palpable. Esteban knew he was walking a tightrope. One false step, and he would lose what little confidence he had managed to gain. "I have an idea," he finally said. "I can approach the construction company as a potential investor. My job as a security guard gives me some credibility in property protection matters. I could offer my services and at the same time get inside information." The proposal was met with contemplative silence. Finally, Jimena nodded. "It's risky, but it could work." "Esteban, if you do this, you'll be putting a lot at stake, are you sure?" Esteban looked at Marisol and Lucia before answering. "I'm sure. It's time for me to do something right for you, for all of you." Thus, Esteban embarked on a dangerous espionage mission. During the day, he kept his job as a security guard. By night, he infiltrated the world of real estate developers, gradually gaining their trust. The stress of this double life began to take its toll. Sleepless nights became more frequent, and the temptation of alcohol returned with renewed force. But every time he felt he was about to fall, he remembered Don Emiliano's words and Lucia's gaze. "I could not fail them, not this time." Meanwhile, in Nueva Esperanza, life went on. Esteban noticed subtle changes in his relationship with Lucia and Marisol. Although still distant, they were no longer actively avoiding him. Lucia even began to ask him questions about his work and his discoveries. One night, after a particularly tense meeting with the construction company executives, Esteban returned to Nueva Esperanza exhausted and demoralized. To his surprise, he found Marisol waiting for him at the entrance to the tunnels. "You look terrible," she said, her tone a mixture of concern and reproach. "It's been a rough night," Esteban replied, too tired to maintain his usual facade of fortitude. Marisol looked at him for a long moment before speaking. "I know what you're doing is dangerous, and I know you're doing it for us. Just be careful, okay?" Those words, the first words of genuine concern Marisol had spoken to him in years, touched something deep in Stephen. Without thinking, he took a step toward her but stopped when he saw her alarmed expression. "I'm sorry," he said quickly, backing away. Thank you, Marisol. I'll be careful, I promise." As he watched her walk away, Esteban felt a mixture of hope and renewed determination. Maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for redemption after all. But fate had other plans. The next day, as Esteban prepared for another meeting with the construction company, he received news that would shake the foundations of Nueva Esperanza and test everything he had achieved so far. The news came like a bolt of lightning in a clear sky. Esteban was in his small space at Nueva Esperanza, preparing for another day of his dangerous double game, when Jimena burst in, her face a mask of concern and urgency. "Esteban, we have a problem," she said without preamble. "I just received information from one of our contacts at City Hall. The construction company has accelerated their plans. They're going to start preliminary excavations in 2 weeks." The world seemed to stop for a moment. 2 weeks. It was much less time than they had anticipated. Stephen felt the weight of the entire community fall on his shoulders. "How is that possible?" he asked, trying to remain calm. They were still supposed to be in the permit approval phase. Jimena shook her head, frustrated. "It seems they have higher connections than we thought. They've managed to bypass several bureaucratic processes. Esteban, we need that information now more than ever. If we don't find a way to stop them..." He didn't need to finish the sentence. They both knew what was at stake. Nueva Esperanza, the shelter that Marisol and Lucia had helped build, home to dozens of families, would be in imminent danger. "I understand," Esteban said, his mind already working on possible strategies. "I will do my best to come up with something concrete at today's meeting. But Jimena, we must prepare for the worst. We need a contingency plan." Jimena nodded, exhaustion visible in her eyes. "We're already working on it. But without solid proof of the illegality of their actions, we don't have much to fight with." When Jimena left, Esteban was left alone with his thoughts. Fear and anxiety threatened to overwhelm him, and for a moment, the familiar pull of alcohol took over. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and remembered what he was fighting for. That afternoon, dressed in his best suit and with steely determination, Esteban headed for the offices of Desarrollo Urbano del Futuro S.A. His heart was pounding as he rode the elevator up, aware that this might be his last chance to get the information they needed. The meeting began like so many others. Fake smiles, firm handshakes, and the usual superficial talk about the bright future the project would bring to Cuautla. But this time, Esteban was determined to go further. Using all the cunning he had developed in his years as a security guard, he began asking seemingly innocent questions about permits and approval processes. He noticed how some executives exchanged nervous glances, how others avoided certain topics. That's when he made a mistake. In his eagerness to obtain information, he pushed too hard on a particularly sensitive point related to environmental impact studies. The project director, a man named Rodrigo Vega, looked at him with sudden suspicion. "Mr. Ruiz," he said in a curt tone, "for someone interested in investing in safety, you seem very concerned about issues that don't concern you." Esteban felt a shiver run down his spine. He had gone too far. He tried to compose himself, to divert the conversation, but it was too late. He watched as Vega made a subtle signal to one of his assistants, who quickly left the room. The meeting ended abruptly shortly thereafter. As Esteban headed for the elevator, he noticed 2 security guards following him at a discreet distance. His heart was pounding. They had discovered his charade. In an act of desperation, Esteban managed to sneak out through an emergency exit. He ran through the streets of Cuautla, his mind a whirlwind of fear and adrenaline. He knew he couldn't go straight back to Nueva Esperanza. He couldn't risk leading anyone there. After hours of circling the city, making sure no one was following him, he finally made his way to the tunnels. Upon arrival, he found the community on alert. His disappearance had not gone unnoticed. Marisol was the first to approach him, her face a mixture of relief and concern. "What happened?" "We were about to send out a search team." Esteban, still panting from the run and built-up tension, could barely articulate. "They found me out. They know something is wrong." Jimena and other community leaders quickly gathered around Esteban. In a makeshift meeting room, he told them all about what had happened at the construction company's offices. "This is bad," Jimena said, her voice heavy with concern. "If they suspect someone is investigating them, they could accelerate their plans even more." "Or worse," added another of the leaders. They could come after us directly. The silence that followed those words was deafening. Everyone in the room was aware of what was at stake. It was Lucia who broke the silence. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice softer than usual as she addressed Esteban. Esteban looked at his daughter, surprised at the lack of hostility in her tone. At that moment he made a decision. "I have an idea," he said, "but it's risky and I'll need everyone's help." Over the next few hours, Esteban laid out his plan. Using his contacts in the city and the information he had managed to gather, he proposed a bold strategy. Publicly expose the construction company's irregularities. If we can get the media interested in the story, if we can show how this construction is not only illegal but would also endanger vulnerable families, we could generate enough public pressure to stop them, he explained. The plan was dangerous. It meant getting out in the open, risking the existence of Nueva Esperanza becoming public knowledge. But it was also their best chance. Marisol, who had remained silent during the explanation, finally spoke up. "Esteban, if we do this, you'll be putting a target on your back. The construction company, the corrupt politicians, they will come after you." The concern in her voice made Esteban's heart skip a beat. "I know," he replied softly. "But it's a risk I'm willing to take. For you, for everyone here." Lucia, with tears in her eyes that she tried to hide, added, "You don't have to do it alone. We can help." Esteban looked at his daughter, touched by her offer. "Thank you, but I can't put you in danger. Any of you." "We're already in danger," Jimena interjected. "And this is our fight as much as it is yours. We'll do it together." And so, with a mixture of fear and determination, the Nueva Esperanza community prepared for its biggest battle yet. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. Esteban, along with a small team, worked tirelessly gathering evidence, preparing documents and contacting trusted journalists. Marisol and Lucia, meanwhile, helped organize the families in the community. They prepared testimonies, stories that would show the world the importance of Nueva Esperanza and the devastating impact of its destruction. As the preparations progressed, Esteban noticed a subtle change in his relationship with Marisol and Lucia. The barriers that had existed for so long were slowly beginning to crumble. Small gestures, worried glances, even the occasional shared smile gave him hope. One night, while working late organizing documents, Lucia approached him with 2 cups of coffee. "I thought you might need this," she said, offering him one of the cups. "Thank you," Esteban replied, surprised and grateful for the gesture. They sat in silence for a moment, the air heavy with unspoken words. Finally, Lucia spoke. "Why are you doing all this, Dad? Why risk so much?" Esteban looked at his daughter, seeing in her the child she had once been and the strong woman she had become. "Because I failed them once," he said in a broken voice, "and I swore to myself that if I ever had the chance to make things right, I would. You, this community, deserve to be protected. And if I can do anything to help, I will." Lucia stared at him, as if really seeing him for the first time in years. "You've changed," she finally said. "I try," Esteban replied with a sad smile, "every day." That moment of connection was interrupted by a commotion coming from the entrance to the tunnels. Esteban and Lucia rushed to see what was going on. When they arrived, they were met with a chaotic scene. Jimena and others were surrounding a gasping, frightened man. He was one of Esteban's contacts in the city. "Esteban!" the man shouted upon seeing him. "You need to get out of here. All of you. The construction company. They've discovered the location of the tunnels. They're on their way with heavy machinery. They plan to seal the entrances tonight." Panic spread like wildfire among those present. Stephen felt the world crumbling around him. They had acted too late. As the community went into a frenzy of activity, preparing for an emergency evacuation, Esteban found himself facing the most difficult decision of his life. He knew he had to do something drastic to buy time, to give everyone a chance to escape and put his plan into action. He looked at Marisol and Lucia, who were helping to organize the families. In their eyes he saw fear, but also a strength he had never fully appreciated before. "Take care of each other," he told them, his voice barely a whisper. Before they could respond, Stephen turned and ran for the exit of the tunnels. He had a plan, one that could cost him everything, but one that could save New Hope. As he ran through the streets of Cuautla, heading toward danger rather than away from it, Esteban felt a strange mixture of fear and peace. For the first time in his life, he was doing the right thing, no matter the personal cost. The night was dark and the first raindrops were beginning to fall, as if the sky itself sensed the battle that was about to be fought. In the distance, Esteban could hear the roar of heavy machinery approaching. Time was running out, and with it, the hope of an entire community. The rain was pouring down as Esteban ran through the streets of Cuautla, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. In the distance, he could see the lights of heavy machinery approaching the tunnels. He knew he had to act fast. With one last glance toward the entrance of Nueva Esperanza, Esteban made a decision that would change the course of everything. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number he had sworn he would never use. "This is Esteban Ruiz," he said as soon as they answered. "I need to speak with Rodrigo Vega from Desarrollo Urbano del Futuro. Tell him I have information about the tunnels." As he waited, Esteban mentally went over his plan. It was risky, but if it worked, he could buy the time the community needed to escape and implement his strategy of public exposure. "Ruiz," Vega's curt voice sounded on the other end of the line. "You have guts to call after your little performance. Give me a reason not to send you to jail right now." Esteban took a deep breath. "I have something you want, Vega. Information about the tunnels, about the people who live there, but it comes at a price." There was a moment of tense silence before Vega responded. "I'm listening. Meet with me. Face to face. I'll give you all the information you need, but first I want assurances." After a brief negotiation, they agreed on a meeting point. Esteban knew he was walking straight into the lion's den, but it was the only way to draw attention away from the tunnels and buy precious time. Meanwhile, in Nueva Esperanza, chaos reigned. Entire families hurriedly packed what little they could carry with them. Marisol and Lucia, along with Jimena, were leading the evacuation, guiding small groups along alternate escape routes they had prepared for emergencies like this one. "Where's Daddy?" asked Lucia, her voice tinged with concern as she helped a mother with her small children. Marisol, with a mixture of pride and fear in her eyes, replied, "He's doing what he thinks is right. She's protecting everyone." At that moment, they both understood the magnitude of the change in Esteban. The man who had once hurt them so badly was now risking everything for them and the community they had built. As the evacuation continued, Esteban arrived at the meeting point agreed upon with Vega. It was an old abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. The rain was falling heavily, creating a dramatic backdrop for what was about to happen. Vega arrived accompanied by two burly bodyguards. His face was a mask of contempt and curiosity. "Okay, Ruiz," Vega said, his voice barely audible over the sound of the rain hitting the metal roof. "Here I am. Your information better be worth it." Esteban, soaking wet and shaking but with unshakable resolve, began to talk. He told them about the tunnels, about the community that lived there, but mixing truths with carefully crafted lies. His goal was to keep Vega interested long enough, to keep him away from the true location of Nueva Esperanza. As Esteban spoke, Vega listened with increasing interest. As the conversation progressed, however, something in Esteban's attitude alerted Vega. "Wait a minute," Vega interrupted. His eyes narrowed with suspicion. "This doesn't add up. You're leading us down the wrong path, aren't you?" Esteban's heart raced. He knew this moment would come, but he hoped he had bought more time. "Think about it, Vega," Esteban said, trying to remain calm. "Why would I tell you all this if it wasn't true? I'm risking my life here." But Vega was not fooled. With a gesture, he ordered his bodyguards to restrain Esteban. "Thought you could play games with me, huh?" growled Vega, approaching menacingly. "Now you're going to tell us the truth, or things are going to get very ugly for you." At that moment, Esteban knew he had reached the end of the road. But he also knew that every minute he managed to keep Vega here was another minute for his family and the community to escape. "Go ahead, Vega," Esteban said, with a defiant smile. "Do what you have to do, but remember, when this all comes out, and it will, you'll be the one who ends up behind bars." Fury took hold of Vega's face. He raised his fist, ready to strike Esteban, when suddenly the sound of sirens filled the air. Police patrol lights illuminated the warehouse. Vega and his men panicked. "What have you done?" shouted Vega, looking at Esteban with a mixture of anger and fear. Esteban, surprised but relieved, replied, I didn't do anything. It looks like your illegal activities have finally caught up with you, Vega. As the police surrounded the building, Esteban saw a familiar figure among the officers. It was his former co-worker, now a detective to whom he had entrusted some of the information about the construction company's illegal activities as a last resort. The next few minutes were a whirlwind of activity. Vega and his men were arrested, while Esteban was taken aside to give his statement. "You got here just in time," Esteban said to his former partner. The detective smiled. "Thanks to the information you gave us, we were able to put together a solid case. But Esteban, where is your family? You mentioned they were in danger." Esteban's face darkened. "I have to go back. Now." As Esteban was escorted back to town, his mind was with Marisol, Lucia, and the entire community of Nueva Esperanza. Had they managed to escape in time? Would they be safe? The rain was beginning to ease as they reached the entrance to the tunnels. Esteban's heart stopped for a moment when he saw that the entrance was intact. There was no sign of the heavy machinery that was supposed to seal the tunnels. With his heart in his throat, Esteban hurried inside, followed closely by his former partner and other officers. The tunnels were quiet. Too quiet. "Marisol! Lucia!" shouted Esteban, his voice echoing in the empty corridors. There was no response. As they advanced deeper into the tunnels, Esteban felt panic growing inside him. Had they arrived too late? Had the community been discovered? And his thoughts were interrupted by a distant sound. Voices. Stephen ran toward the source of the sound, with the officers following close behind. As he rounded a corner, he came upon a scene that took his breath away. There, in one of the largest spaces in Nueva Esperanza, was the entire community. Entire families, children, the elderly, all gathered and celebrating. Celebrating. "Dad!" Lucia's shout cut through the air. Before Esteban could process what was happening, he found himself enveloped in a fierce embrace from his daughter. Marisol approached, tears in her eyes but a smile on her lips. "You made it," she said softly. Esteban, still confused, looked around. "But what happened? I thought they had to evacuate, that the machinery was coming to seal the tunnels." Jimena approached, a proud smile on her face. "Your distraction bought us the time we needed, Esteban. While you kept Vega busy, we set our plan in motion." As it turned out, while Esteban risked his life distracting Vega, the community had been working at full speed. Using the contacts and information they had gathered, they managed to alert the media and authorities about the construction company's illegal activities. "But that's not all," added Lucia, her face beaming with pride. "Mom had a brilliant idea." Marisol, with a humility that contrasted with the magnitude of her actions, explained, "I remembered that we had old documents proving that these tunnels are part of Cuautla's historical heritage. We presented them to the cultural authorities and, in a matter of hours, they declared this entire area a protected site." Esteban was stunned. His whole plan, his sacrifice, had been just a part of something much bigger. The community he had once underestimated had shown incredible strength and cunning. But what about the machinery? Vega's men, he asked, still trying to process it all. One of the residents, an older man named Don Joaquin, laughed. "Ah, that. We happened to have some friends in the workers' union. When they found out what was going on, they convinced the machine operators to have an unexpected breakdown." Laughter and relief rippled through the room. Esteban found himself laughing and crying at the same time, overcome with emotion. At that moment, his former partner, the detective, approached. "Esteban, we need to talk about all of this. There's a lot to explain to the authorities." Esteban nodded, aware that there were still challenges ahead, but when he looked at Marisol and Lucia, he saw in their eyes something he hadn't seen in years. Trust, respect, and perhaps the beginning of forgiveness. "We'll be with you," Marisol said, taking his hand. Lucia nodded, placing herself on the other side of her father. As they prepared to leave and face whatever came, Esteban knew that, no matter what happened, he was no longer alone. He had found not only his family, but an entire community, and in the process he had found himself. The days and weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activity. The story of Nueva Esperanza became national news. Journalists from all over Mexico flocked to Cuautla to learn the incredible story of the subway community and its fight against corporate corruption. Esteban, Marisol, and Lucia found themselves in the media spotlight. Although overwhelming at first, they soon realized that this was their chance to give a voice to those who for so long had remained in the shadows. The authorities, initially skeptical, were soon forced to recognize the legitimacy of Nueva Esperanza. The historical documents presented by Marisol, together with public pressure generated by media coverage, led to the official declaration of the tunnels as protected cultural heritage. Meanwhile, the case against Desarrollo Urbano del Futuro S.A. and its accomplices in the local government was advancing rapidly. The evidence gathered by Esteban and the community proved crucial in dismantling a web of corruption that extended far beyond Cuautla. But for Esteban, the real challenge was just beginning. Now that the immediate danger had passed, he faced the most difficult task of all, rebuilding his relationship with Marisol and Lucia. One afternoon, as the community worked to improve conditions in the tunnels, now with the support of volunteers and organizations from across the region, Esteban found a moment to talk alone with Marisol. "All of this, it's incredible," he said, looking around in awe. "What you've built here, what you've accomplished, I'm so proud of you, Marisol." Marisol looked at him, a mixture of emotions crossing her face. "Thank you, Esteban, but you know none of this erases what came before." Esteban nodded, the weight of his past actions still heavy on his shoulders. "I know, and I don't expect it to. I just want you to know that I understand the damage I caused. I'm committed to being better, not just for you, but for myself." Marisol studied him for a moment before speaking. "You've changed, Esteban. I see that. And I'm willing to try to rebuild something. It won't be easy, and it will take time, but I think it's worth a try." Those words, more than Esteban had ever dared hope for, filled him with a hope he hadn't felt in years. With Lucia, the process was equally challenging but rewarding. One night, while working together on a project to improve the tunnel's ventilation system, Lucia finally opened her heart. "You know, for years I hated you," she said, her voice quiet but emotionally charged. "I hated what you had done to us, how you had hurt us. But seeing you these last few months, seeing you change, risking everything for us, it made me realize that people can really change if they put their minds to it." Esteban, with tears in his eyes, could barely respond. "Lucia, I'm so sorry. For everything. I know I can't change the past, but I promise that every day I'll try to be the father I always should have been." Lucia looked up at him, a small smile forming on her lips. "I know, Dad, and I'm willing to give you that chance." As the months passed, new hope transformed. What was once a hidden refuge became a symbol of hope and resilience. The tunnels, now safe and renovated, became a unique community space, attracting visitors from all over the country. Esteban, Marisol, and Lucia worked tirelessly with the rest of the community to turn Nueva Esperanza into a model of sustainable development and mutual support. They established education programs, trade workshops, and support services for families in vulnerable situations. The success of Nueva Esperanza inspired communities throughout Mexico. Soon, similar projects sprang up in other cities, creating a network of support and solidarity that spread throughout the country. Esteban, who had once hit rock bottom, found himself leading workshops on addiction and recovery. His story of redemption became a source of inspiration for many struggling with their own demons. Marisol, recognized for her role in cultural heritage preservation, was invited to lecture at universities and participate in community development projects nationwide. Lucia, inspired by her experience, decided to study law, determined to fight for the rights of vulnerable communities and against corporate corruption. One afternoon, almost 2 years after that rainy night that changed everything, Esteban found himself sitting in one of Nueva Esperanza's hydroponic gardens. Marisol and Lucia joined him, each bringing a cup of coffee. "What are you thinking about, Papa?" asked Lucia, noticing Esteban's contemplative expression. Esteban looked at his daughter, then at Marisol, and finally at the bustling tunnel beyond the garden, where members of the community were coming and going with purpose and joy. "I think about miracles," he said softly, "in how sometimes out of the darkest places the brightest light can emerge. in how forgiveness and love can transform everything. Marisol took his hand, an action that now felt natural and comforting. "We've come a long way," she said. Lucia, smiling, added, "And we still have a long way to go." Stephen nodded, feeling a peace he had never experienced before. "Yes, and I'm grateful for every step of the way, even the difficult ones, for they brought us here to this moment." As the sun set over Cuautla, its light filtering through ingenious mirror systems into the tunnels of Nueva Esperanza, Esteban Ruiz knew he had found something more valuable than any treasure, a second chance, a family reunited, and a community that proved that, with love, determination, and hope, even the most impossible dreams can come true. In the depths of the earth, where once there was only darkness and despair, now shone a light of hope, a testament to the power of redemption and the unbreakable human spirit.